and good evening, wherever you might be located. This is Eric Miscoll, and I'm the publisher EMSNOW, and welcome to, I believe this is the 6th virtual edition of the Eric Miscoll Show. We appreciate you taking time out of your schedules to join us here today. Before I get into the introductions here for the day, quick couple housekeeping standard issues. Everybody is on mute. If you have a question you wish to pose, please use the question tab at the bottom of the screen there. And as always, we will be recording this, and that will be posted within the week. We're heading into the 4th of July weekend here in the United States, so it may not be till next week that this one comes out. But anyway, as always, I'd like to thank my colleague and co-host, Phil Stoten, for getting up early and joining us here today. Phil, as always, is down under in Australia. Before I introduce the guests, let me just say the focus of our discussion today is intended to be on leadership in the EMS industry, and more specifically to understand the correlation between talent development and attraction even to the larger share of wallet from customers and how talent impacts the bottom line. The issue of leadership has come up repeatedly in a lot of the interviews we've been doing with industry executives here lately. So we thought it worthwhile to conduct a much more deep look into the issue. And to help us with that, we've invited two very appropriate guests, I think, both with long histories in the EMS industry. First, let me see, in the pink jacket, we have Audrey McGuckin. Audrey is the CEO of the Audrey McGuckin Leadership Solutions and also is a member of the steering committee of the Strategic Human Resources Institute at the Conference Board. We then also have, I always point out where they are on the screen, and I know it changes once we produce it, but currently in the upper left, Jeremy Vanselous, who is the president of SearchWorks Group, an executive search firm within the industry. So welcome both of you, and we appreciate you taking time out of your days to join us here today. Let's begin with introductions other than just the names I did. Audrey, why don't we start with you and let you each kind of give a brief introduction of yourself and your company for our audience.
Yeah, thanks Eric, and thanks for having Jeremy and I. We're pretty excited to be on the show today. Just a brief historic insight from me on some of my career. I have 20-something years in the EMS industry, and I started my career actually in Jabil, and the CFO at the time, Forbes Alexander, who's just recently retired. He actually hired me as an admin, and so my key responsibilities were to do the filing and to make the coffee, and I made pretty fine coffee, I can say. And then fast forward 20-something years later, Jabil really supported me through a 4-year business degree along with a master's degree, and I was honoured to spend 30% of my career in Europe, helping integrate some of their largest acquisitions, Philips and Marconi and some of the other ones. 50% of my career was in the US as the Chief Talent Officer, and then 20% I'm really honoured to say was spent in Asia. So I had a really great time in Asia. When I got back from Asia, I decided to gift myself on my 50th birthday a startup, and I'm thrilled to say that 3 years in, we're one of the fastest growing boutique firms serving large organizations out with EMS as well. And so what our firm does is we help organizations really get to the value and the impact of talent and leadership. And we have a really a fine-tuned, what we call the McGuckin method, and how we do that. So we've got the blueprint, we know where the dead bodies are, and we can typically shine a torch for people to show them where the potholes are. So the three areas of our business is really organizational design, making sure that you're set up in the right way to execute your business. The second is really around talent, which is the piece around succession management, and really making sure that you've got the right talent in the right places. And then the third one, which you mentioned, Eric, is really around this notion of leadership. And we know the impact of leadership and what it has on the bottom line. And so we help grow and build leadership capabilities. So it's a pleasure to join you guys. I'm excited about the conversation. This is one of my favorite topics. So yeah.
Excellent. Jeremy, the floor is.
Yes, okay. Yeah, so I've been in the EMS industry for 21 years, so a little less than Audrey, but still I think a fair amount. I started my career with Selectron in program management, so I got very familiar with the EMS industry with Selectron for about 6 years, and then landed with a small materials management company that did materials management for OEMs that were utilizing EMS companies. And 12 years ago, now I can't believe it's gone that fast, got invited to join this practice, this firm SearchWorks, and decided that I was going to dedicate my work within the field that I came from, which was EMS. So for the past 12 years, we've been dedicated to supporting the EMS industry. Over that time, we've worked with close to 100 companies now all over the world in helping them attract top talent at the executive, management, and individual contributing levels from time to time. And we tend to focus most of our attention in operations and supply chain programs, quality, engineering, across those disciplines, again, for predominantly EMS companies. It's what we do all day, every day.
Excellent.
Very good.
Now you see why we invited these two on the show. So let's start right in, and either of you can start. What kind of talent problems are you seeing in the industry these days?
Yeah, Jeremy, I don't know if I hop in first. And
go ahead and open, Audrey, you bet.
Yeah. One of the things, Eric, that we've been doing most recently is we've actually been spending a lot of times with OEMs and really asking them the question. The first question is really, why do you outsource in the first place? And that's typically around footprint, capability, access to technology, and of course, cost and value. But the second question we ask them is, why do you give more business to one EMS provider versus another? Or in other words, why do some EMS providers get more share of wallet? Or why do they get more business? And the answer is not surprising. It's something that certainly I've known for years. Forbes and I would have many conversations about this in Jabil. And, some of the things that we're hearing them say, Eric, is we have given 300% more business to certain EMS providers because of the quality of their sales leadership. Okay. We've also heard them say that we have fired some EMS providers because their general manager wasn't able to execute on the plan. And so the narrative from the OEMs is pretty strong. And we all know that on this call, right? And our listeners know that as well, that the EMS industry, we all have access to the same machines. We all have access to the same parts. And we also, we just have access to all of that stuff. But the thing that makes a difference, unquestionably, all of the time, is talent and leadership.
Yeah.
Right. And so given that that's what the OEMs are saying,
Yeah.
and then we talk to EMS providers, and what we hear them saying, Jeremy and I, is we're worried about the vitality of our pipeline. We're challenged in trying to find top talent. It's really hard for us to find diverse talent, because diverse talent only joins organizations where they can see people like them. And so those are some of the things that we're hearing from the EMS industry. And so you bubble all that up and you say, this is what the OEMs are saying, and this is what the EMS guys are saying. And sitting at the center is talent and leadership.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And it's interesting that the OEMs are seeing that as a key a key buying signal, but also a key retention signal to stay with a particular EMS, because like you say, it's a Me Too industry, and you've got to differentiate somewhere, and clearly talent is part of that. What about you, Jeremy?
Well, and part of what Audrey was saying is, you've got this situation now where, we're only going to need more and more electronic manufacturing. The world is going that way. So, and the emphasis continues to be on people and execution. Yet at the same time, we've got a real issue, at least here in the US. I think China and Mexico and other Southeast Asian countries will fare better than us, but we've got a major generational gap issue happening here, where demand is increasing for the products and the services, and the talent pool to fill those jobs is shrinking and leaving at a rate of 10,000 people a day on average now, and that's going to intensify over the next 5 to 10 years. So it's this gap that we have to address as well.
And why does that gap exist? Is that because the industry is seen as unattractive? Because it pays pretty well. It's known that the STEM jobs tend to pay as well as many other careers, but students don't tend to want to go in that. I think Audrey made a really good point, that is, if you can't see people like you succeeding in a business or an industry, it's challenging to kind of be, the first person of color to get to the top, or the first woman to get to the top, or whatever else. Is that part of the problem? There are too many, middle-aged white men in the sector.
Yeah, it's not just that, but Audrey, I want you to talk about that. The idea that people have someone like them to look up to as a mentor to demonstrate the path in this industry. But I think the core problem was that we outsourced for 25 plus years, and during that time, who's going to go to school for electronic manufacturing? Who's going to go to school to learn the disciplines within this industry, because there were this many of them here. So I think that helped create this gap where, kids just didn't go into the industry, and they didn't go learn about the industry. They went and did, other things, coding and app development and other things that they could do here.
So Audrey, talk about that skill shortage and how that's occurred, where that's come from.
Yeah, and let me pull us up just for a second, and we think about, what are the mega trends that we're seeing broadly in the environment. And one of the mega trends is consumerization. And so we think, right, how is consumerization connected to talent and leadership? And I often, I'll tell you a story in just a second, but this notion of mass customization as it relates to consumers is having an impact. And what I mean by that is employees see themselves as consumers. That's number one. Second, consumers want everything customized. I have 17-year-old twin daughters, and Hannah is a consumer and she'll be entering the workplace pretty soon, but her peers are in the workplace. When Hannah goes to buy her sneakers and I go to buy my sneakers, it's a very different experience. I go to the store, I pick them off the shelf and I pay for them. Hannah goes online and she asks, can I customize the shoelaces? And if the answer is no, she goes to the next website.
Yeah.
The second question she asks is, can these sneakers be connected to my devices? And if the answer is no, she goes to the next website. Then she asks, can I have them delivered within the next 12 to 18 hours? And if the answer is no, she's going somewhere else. Employees today are consumers and they have the same questions. And so it takes a level of sophistication inside an organization to create that employee experience where it can be customized, it can be real time, and it can meet their needs. And I think that's particularly relevant to Gen Z and the millennials.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Is part of the problem that when you look at leadership from the point of view of talent management, that really we don't always measure leaders on their performance in talent management? We're very focused on that quarterly result. We're very focused on EBITDA and earnings, and we're not considering the kind of overall HR wellness of the business. Does that need to change?
Yes,
Or is it changing?
Yeah, we have a saying in our firm that, you know, what gets measured gets done, and what gets rewarded gets repeated. And unless you have a reward system that's directly correlated to leadership, meaning how much bench are you developing? What is the strength of your succession? How long does it take you to hire top talent? Can you keep top talent? Unless you're measuring those, people are really just moving on to whatever else it is that's getting measured in the organization.
Yeah, Audrey said a good word there a minute ago, and that was sophistication. And I think as a whole, the EMS industry needs to elevate the level of sophistication relative to talent development, talent attraction. The problem with EMS is that it is such a high urgency, high stress, high pressure business that even though this is incredibly important, I mean, there are sirens, it's screaming at you. Unless somebody makes it a priority, it's going to get second fiddle, right? It's just, it's never going to get done. That level of sophistication is what I'm talking about, that the leaders within EMS really need to make this a priority if they really want to compete and win in the future.
Yeah.
Let me ask then, if I could, the distinction between development and attraction on the talent side. Development is internal, attraction comes from outside. So do companies then that are having to attract and go outside quite a bit, is that reflective of a failure of their internal development processes and the culture they've developed to retain and develop people?
You know, I think sometimes, I don't think it's a straight up failure of the talent development strategy. Some situations just call for new talent.
Change. Yeah.
You know, but Audrey can speak, you know, for days about that topic.
Eric,
I'll give you a minute. So
what I would say is we obsess about connecting your talent strategy to your business strategy. It can't sit in isolation. Some EMS providers may need a strategy of, we want to hire 30% external because we need to increase diversity, or we're changing end markets, or we need a new technology. Some organizations may say it needs to be 60-40. Others may say it's 90-10. And the only thing it depends on is where you're going with your business strategy and what are the levers that you need to pull to execute that strategy.
Yeah. Audrey, have you seen examples where leadership has kind of placed talent front and center, and that's kind of led to other business success and other, you know, those other KPIs being pushed in the right direction? And have you seen examples of where, you know, talent has been ignored at the peril of the bottom line?
Yeah, I have. And I'll give you perhaps an example where it's not being focused on. And we have a famous saying in our firm that the fish rots from the head. And what I mean by that is if the CEO doesn't care about this, it's not happening. It doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, there needs to be a top-down strategy, because there's investment and there's time and there's many aspects to it. So the first thing is the fish rots from the head. If the CEO isn't demanding it and bought into it, it just doesn't happen. Where we've seen CEOs make this a number 5 priority, what we hear from their customers is that they're reducing the amount of business they're giving them. The feedback is that they're stale, they lack innovation, and they lack diversity. And that finds its way straight to the bottom line and the top line. An example of where I've seen that go well, and I'm going to give a nod to Don Sharon, the CEO at Kimball. We've been working with Don for a couple of years now, and he has steadfastly said, this is a priority for us. We're going to spend time on it and we're going to invest in it. And Jeremy, I know that you've done some research on this as you and I have worked together, but Kimball is at the top of the house when we look at the top EMS providers for the quality of the diversity on their board and on their leadership team. And it was a specific strategy and it was intentional. And when we talk to their clients, they really talk about the strength of that diversity, the innovation it brings, and this idea of it's a safe pair of hands. It's that there's that leadership team that's in place. I don't know, Phil, if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it does. And I think it's important to say, because I think I have seen, I've spoken to a lot of CEOs recently, and there definitely are those leaders that see talent as not just a key differentiator, but as a key strategic asset within their business. And, they see diversity and those things as key issues, because that reflects what they're seeing in their customers, but as you mentioned, what they're seeing in their customers' consumers, as that goes further down the line. And everybody I've spoken to in the kind of front end ideation design part of the electronic supply chain has told me that diverse design teams are the way to create the best products. Yes. And they've proved that time and time again.
Yeah, I'd love to ask Jeremy to hop in here for a second. Him and I are actually working on a white paper, and we're actually doing a lot of research in the EMS industry, so we'll share that with your listeners. One of the things, Jeremy, that you and I looked at was board representation, and you might want to, that might be helpful just to share what we're seeing on a board level.
Yeah, absolutely.
There it is.
Yeah, so I thought it was pretty interesting. I just wanted to take a snapshot of, the top 10, EMS companies, and take a look at diversity in their boards and their executive teams. And, within that top 10, on average, there's only 14% of the boards and the executive teams are represented by some form of diversity, whether that be women or people of color. So there's just, in general, there's a lot of opportunity there. And, back to this idea of sophistication, if you look at, most of the boards of these types of companies are represented by people at other world-class companies, Amazon, Apple, FedEx, UPS, L3 Harris. I mean, just these are very sophisticated organizations, and they are adopting practices and behaviors that they're going to absolutely expect their EMS partners to start adopting, right? So there's just a mindset that the sooner you can get on board with this, the sooner you're going to stand out to your prospective customers. Yeah.
Hey,
So
Jeremy, can I just jump in? I mean, it's somewhat surprising because I think if you look at the top 10, most of them are Asian, right? So it would seem to me that most of the board and would be at least an American perspective, people of color, right?
So yeah, I'll rephrase top 10. So I'll rephrase top 10 US.
Okay, there we go. Gotcha. I will draw the questions, sir. So
yeah. So as we go into the fourth decade of the EMS industry, how do you change 30 years of bad habits? How do you change this industry's behavior in terms of its recruiting strategy, in terms of its HR strategy? Obviously, some people come willingly and they reach out to people like Jeremy and Audrey and say, hey, we need to make this course adjustment. So firstly, how do you respond to them and how do you create change? And as a whole within the industry, how do we create that demand for change? Is it from the staff up? Is it from the customers in? Is it from the inside out?
Yeah, that's a great question, Phil. I think, the starting point is the CEO needs to have the aha that this matters. Yeah. And how a CEO gets an aha that this matters is either through OEM customer feedback, and that they can correlate to their P&L and balance sheet. The second, often the reason is that boards are demanding it. Boards don't want to take risk. They do not want to take risk with the vitality of the talent pipeline. And so there's a board issue as well. And then you see employees voting with their feet. And so you'll start to see retention. So those are typically the forces that will get the CEO to have the aha. And then once they have the aha, then there's a very specific way that you really go about that. And the first is connecting your talent strategy to your business strategy. But before I hop in there, Jeremy, let me give you the floor for a second.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, it's the idea that the CEO has to have the aha moment is absolute. That's where it's all got to start. I think it's important to recognize too that this can feel like a lot, right? It can feel like a big thing to have to manage, and I think you would have to support it more than necessarily manage it. There are obviously resources right here that have the playbook, that know how to go about making all of this happen within a large global organization. The support, the desire needs to be there. And then, you can trust, just as you would in your CEO capacity, to have the people around you execute, right? And so that's where, these types of solutions come in and become important and valuable.
Yeah. And I think, let's not forget, we're in a very tactical industry, right? We're in a very show me, prove it, engineering focused, data process oriented, and there is a process, right? And Jeremy and I have fine-tuned that with a lot of the work that we're doing, and we use what we call the 6 Bs, which is what talent do you need to buy to execute, what talent do you need to bind rapid retention strategy around, who needs to leave, who do you need to bounce because they're low performers and you need to create space, who do you need to boost, who are your high potentials. So there's a real process oriented tactical way that you can get to the right outcomes with this. It's not all strategic and it's not all high level. We very quickly roll our sleeves up, get alongside our clients and really just make it consumable and make it easy, although it's complicated.
Yeah. Go ahead, Eric.
No,
I was going to say, we've got a few major dynamics happening in the world at the moment. One is a pandemic that I'm sure everybody has noticed. but also what's been going on with race riots and different things in the US. How much rapid change are they causing in terms of what you're getting in terms of inbound discussions, in terms of what leadership has to do? Does leadership have to shape up differently to these specific challenges? And this work at home environment, is that playing into the field of Generation Z and millennials and all those kind of things? What's changing right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Phil, you talked a lot about what's changing environmentally and really what that's meaning from a leadership perspective. The traditional things that you would expect from leaders is get your business financials right, drive consistent results, execute on customer service. What we're seeing in this new world is leaders that can set direction and adapt to fast-changing market and conditions. We need leaders that can lead in complex and ambiguous situations. We need leaders that can motivate a diverse workforce, and that looks different to how it looked even 5 years ago. And so there's these traditional leadership competencies, and they don't go away. And this is what we call the "and" conversation. So you need to manage your financials, and you need to communicate with purpose. And so I think that's what's different from a leadership perspective, Phil.
Yeah.
And
I think there's also still talking about the influences that are going on around us right now. There's still, and this was part of a show I saw earlier today. There's still a lack of education. You can't assume that the CEO knows how to address some of the inequality that exists within their operations. So part of it is like a self-awareness and becoming aware, becoming educated so that you know how to address those issues. And that writing a memo saying that, this is how I feel, this is how I believe, and we're going to be diverse and inclusive, that is meaningless without action. And so those were some big takeaways from another show I saw earlier today.
Okay. And when you look at leadership, we talk a lot about CEO and we talk a lot about the C-suite, but if you're in an organization like one of the large EMSs in the US, you might have 150,000 people. That leadership, the need for leadership talent and that leadership model must come down quite a way. You've got to get down to almost team leadership and all those different layers in between. How do you make sure that culture at the top gets drilled down all the way through the business?
Yeah, that's a great question, Phil. And I think Kimball is a really standout example. The CEO has been investing additional investment in the last couple of years, and they really have what I would call 3 journeys that they're running together. One journey is that they're developing their executive leaders. Another journey that they're doing is developing their vice president level, which is the top 50. And then this third layer is really their functional managers, right? The people that are really on the front line. And Kimball's done a really outstanding job of developing those 3 tiers, but having what I call the golden threads running through it. And so their culture is woven throughout all of those journeys. And so the culture and the narrative is the same, but how you develop leaders in Thailand at a functional manager level is kind of different to how you do that in Jasper, Indiana, but there are some golden threads that run through it. And I think that's what's interesting. I was actually talking with Dr. Sue, who is the chief technology officer for Jabil in Taiwan, and we were really just talking about the Asia program that we designed and delivered there. And we 4 of us had this question about, is it different in each country? And the delivery mechanism's different and the context is different, but the golden threads should remain the same. So if you have certain cultural values, which is we respect our people, that doesn't change in Thailand or Taiwan or Romania or Poland. It's the same. But how it's delivered in the context of that country looks a little bit different. So Phil, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Let me ask though, then, how do you recommend to companies, and obviously this industry goes from the very small to the ginormous, how do you recommend EMS companies get to kind of this desired end state where they're improving these processes and improving the quality and of their executive suites and their bench players?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that Jeremy and I are doing is we're really talking to a lot of CEOs, and it can be with small EMS firms or large ones. And the first real thing that we talk to them about is this leadership dilemma of when do I push and when do I pause? And the first thing that EMS companies can do, regardless of size, is pause, even if just for a short space of time, to say, what am I trying to get as an outcome?
Right.
And that small EMS provider, that outcome is going to look wildly different to what either a Jabil or a Flex or a larger EMS. But it's this time to pause and to be able to articulate the outcomes, because let's face it, single-digit profit margins. It's a bare knuckle industry that's tough, right? And we don't have time to dance around things that are non-value add, and we have to get to the meat and potatoes really quickly. And so it starts with just pause.
Yeah.
Jeremy, what do you have to add?
Yeah, I agree with Audrey. The pause is really important because it'll give somebody the opportunity to reflect and understand where are their highest value people? Where are they contributing? Are their highest value people contributing on the highest value business? Or is there a mismatch? If you just take some time to reflect and think about how you have your people aligned to your business and your customers, then you're probably going to get a revelation or two about some change that you need to make.
So how do you measure the success then? I mean, we talked earlier about KPIs and different things. And so when you're working with companies, what's that dashboard that you work? Is that has to do with, I imagine some attrition rate is an insightful metric, right? Why are people leaving, right? But what is there that you coach people on?
I think, Eric, the work we do is when you start off with the talent strategy and the outcomes, that's really what you're measuring. So one EMS provider may say, we want to increase our innovation levels. The customer said we're stale. So we know that one way to increase innovation is by bringing in external talent. We know another way to increase innovation is diversity. So some of the measures would be how diverse is your teams that are working on these innovative products. And then, once you make some of those changes, then going back to the OEM and really getting that second read on their experience and their views on that innovation. That would be one example. Another example might be, we want to maintain our culture, and so you would do a cultural assessment at the beginning, and then you do the work, and then you do a cultural assessment at the end. We could sit here and say it impacts your bottom line and it impacts your top line, but there's other factors come into that as well, right? And so we're not naive enough to think that that's the only thing, but you determine those success metrics based on what it is you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and I think there's two things to consider as well. One is, talking on your attrition point, Eric, which is, that is an issue historically in EMS, retention, churn. In our experience, a lot of that can be avoided just by making sure call it the decision makers and influencers through the process are really defining what they need out of this particular person or this position. Don't just throw a job description out there that you've had for 15 years and ask somebody to go get that. talk about it, get consensus, get an agreement, make sure you're very clear on what you need so that when you go get that person, everybody's starting out on the right page with the right expectations, with the right goals in mind. You'll limit that attrition to begin with just by, again, pausing, slowing down a little bit at the beginning to make sure that you have it well defined. The other thing that I think about is, you think about the cost of a vacancy, right? How much does it cost your company to have a vacancy, or God forbid, to lose somebody after 30, 60 days? It can be 2.5 times their salary when you start to layer in loss of productivity, negative impact to morale, all these other factors. And so, understanding where you can anticipate some needs within your business, get a head start on it so that you start to create a healthy pipeline for yourself, so that when those situations do come along, you're able to react much, much faster. We've got some clients, it takes them 8, 10, 12 weeks to get somebody on board. We've presented candidates in less than 2 weeks. They get hired, but they get hired 10 weeks later. Having a decisive and efficient process to attract talent is massively important. And then a whole nother topic that we could talk about for a day is onboarding and how important that is. But we'll talk about that in a white paper later.
Oh, good.
Yeah. And I guess that's the training side. What I was curious about also when you think about talent is that very top of the funnel, the attracting young talent, getting people into the industry. A lot of companies seem to have started to forge relationships with academia, with schools. They run, kind of robotic challenges, those kind of things. How important is that? Is that being done well? Is it working?
I think it's starting to work. We talked about that a little bit last week, about how the whole idea that HR and marketing, right? They need to be like this, right? Because all the companies have an image. They have a social image, and a lot of EMS companies are really doing well creating social platforms and sharing content and creating awareness about their businesses and why they're a great place to work. So how culture and people fall into that is incredibly important. And I would say if you're an EMS business leader and you do not have your HR organization tied at the hip with marketing, you need to right away. But I do see a lot of top EMS companies starting to do some good work there. What about you, Audrey?
Yeah, I mean, it's back to this consumerization. The Gen Z and the millennials are pretty sophisticated, and how they consume information before they join a company is wildly different to how any of us would have thought about joining a company. But a lot of creativity we see out there. And I think some of the creativity is around what I would call social purpose and community. So there's this engineering technical pace that they're forging with the universities, but a lot of people are looking for organizations that have a strong purpose and a strong culture. And I think that's something else that's a decision point for people joining organizations.
Especially young people, yeah. If you want to attract the next generation of talent into your company, be thinking about those things.
Yeah, we didn't have Glassdoor back when we were in the job market to be able to go and look and see what employees, how they're rating and they're talking about their companies. I mean, that's a whole new element to this, as you're talking about with the consumerization, Audrey, and the new generations and what they do. So interesting. Hey, we are going to run out of time fast and we can keep going, but I wanted to kind of wrap this by asking you for your parting words of wisdom, so to speak. But what would you share kind of in closing for the audience about, within this very big issue, what would you suggest? And Audrey, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of really getting an understanding of your current state. And I talked about pausing. And when I say pause, the double click on that is, What does my talent look like? What is the quality of it? Where do I have gaps, and where is my risk? So the first thing you need to do is what Jeremy and I call a growth or talent audit, which is, where am I at this moment? And then the second thing they need to do is, and where do I need to get to based on my business strategy? That's the single biggest piece of advice I would offer.
Very good. Jeremy.
Yeah. And I would go back to something that I said. I would go back to what I said earlier about this feeling, overwhelming, right? That it's there's a lot of pieces involved in this, and that's, just remember it. You have to just start with the desire to do this right. Once you have the desire to do this right, there are people who are here to help, who can help, who know how to get it done. I like to use the analogy right back, with the EMS companies, right? You do what you do for your customers. People like us do what we do for you. It's important, and I think it's action worthy.
Yeah. No, I think it's fascinating. A couple of takeaways from me. One is that Audrey's business has a lot of sayings, and they're all good. So the line, "We have a saying for that," comes up consistently.
Yeah.
But for me, I think the key thing is understanding that leadership and talent is what is going to drive your business in the future. It's going to drive success on the bottom line. It's going to drive recruiting success. It's going to drive reflection in your customers and in your consumers. So it's a hugely important part of the business. And the more I see executive C-suite people talking about it and focusing on it, the more success, and the more I see them differentiating in a very Me Too market. So it's absolutely a key element of what needs to change in the EMS industry as we kind of create an industry that's fit for the future, post-pandemic and beyond.
Yeah, very good. In closing, let me say that I think for both, so Audrey and Jeremy, thank you for joining us. We're going to share their affiliations on the screen here afterwards, so you can get a hold of them. They're both also very active on LinkedIn. So if you haven't heard of LinkedIn, sign up, join up, and follow both of these people. They're very good, very active, and we encourage you to do that. Hopefully we can follow up at some point on some of this, because this is an issue that will not go away.
Yes.
This doesn't all of a sudden get solved and we move on to the next issue, right? I also want to thank our guests for taking the time for out of their days to be with us here today. I will say there were no questions posed by the audience, but there was an endorsement offered for both Jeremy and Audrey. So somebody knows you, and it says, Jeremy and Audrey are the best in the field. Been looking forward to this show. So you have fans out there, and we can help. So thank you for everybody. We have more of these scheduled every 2 weeks on a move forward. Our next one, actually, we have executive from Zollner and also Dieter Weiss, our colleague, Mr. European EMS industry data. So please look forward to those, look for our new ones, and everybody, please stay safe out there. Thank you.
Take care.